Well, thank you. And it's been great hearing all your stories today. Just a lot of things happening with sustainable tourism. So you're not here to get to learn about it. You're here to share with what you're doing. So there's a lot already going on. And your challenge in just a few moments is going to be, well, what are our next steps? There's a lot of things happening here. There's a lot of entities, there's a lot of resources out there. What is the next step to move forward this Alberta Sustainable Tourism Initiative? And I've got a story for you about what a group in Montana, much like yourself, much in a setting like this through a period of time, how they approached handling sustainable tourism or the kind of responsible tourism that was making the communities better places to live in and making them better places to visit. So that's the story I'm going to share with you, and be thinking about where you're going to go next with all of this and putting it together and what your next steps are. This may be an approach that can work for you, and it may be an approach that you're already past it and you don't need this. But what I'm going to talk about is a product called the Montana Tourism Charter. And this, similar to what you've got on your tables, where you see the initiative or it explains, here's the mission, here's the goals, here's the objectives. This is a group of statements. This is a talk that helps direct the walk of sustainable tourism. Let's talk about how this came together. This is something that it has a context that it was created in. And the Montana Tourism Charter is something that is a standalone document, but the foundation that it was built off of came over a period of time that, let's say, started in the early 90s. A whole series of Montana Tourism and Recreation strategic plans that were put together by the Tourism and Recreation Partnership in Montana. The process for strategic planning in Montana is that we go around with meetings like this in 7 to 8 different locations, geographically spread across the state, and invite those that are involved in the tourism and recreation industry, those that are interested in it, and those that are concerned about it, to come and talk about where we want, what kind of tourism do we want, what do we want, where do we want to see tourism in a 5-year period, what actions do we need to take in order to get to that place. And so since the early 90s, we've had 4 such strategic plans that have been put into place. And some of the common themes that have come through that, similar to here in Alberta, we recognize that it is our place, is the reason why we live here. It's the reason why we have a tourism industry. It's this spectacular landscape is why people come. And we need to protect that, and we need to sustain it, and we need to enhance it. That's what you've all talked about here in your efforts. So that's one of the focuses in all of these strategic plans. But we also know that Montanans need to get more benefit out of this than a decline in their lifestyle. Because if they're not happy hosts, if they're not willing to invite people into their house, the people are not going to have a good experience. Montanans are not going to have a good experience, and this tourism just isn't going to work. And so some of the defining things that have come out of our strategic plans, in particular in one of our latest ones, one of the very top principles was tourism. Serve Montanans first. It's that responsible tourism type of thing. Make places a good place to live. Let's see what we can do with tourism that can make Montana into that good place. That's one of the contexts for the Montana Tourism Charter. It bases itself off a lot of the discussions of the statewide strategic planning processes that have often included anywhere from 1,300 to 1,500 Montanans across the state and giving feedback. And they also not are the people who input and say, okay, someone else has to do this. They also become the stakeholders that, as Dr. Goodwin has talked about, that sustainable tourism really gets into place. You just don't talk about it, but it actually works when there's local action that takes place. So each of the stakeholders, the people who input on this is what we want tourism to be, they're the ones responsible for getting it there. And they're the ones responsible for keeping the connection. We also, as Bev talked about with the geotourism, the Crown of the Continent project. About the time the charter was being connected is when that phone call came in from the National Geographic Center for Sustainable Destinations and said that you've got a wonderful place up there. Would you like to work with us on this project? And they gave us this concept of geotourism, where we're using tourism, or tourism is something that's enhancing the geographical character of our place. It's sustaining it. So it's talking about the environment, that protection, that golden, the goose that lays the golden egg that we've talked about that's so important. It's talking about the culture, talking about the people, their practices, how they've lived in this land, the story, their heritage, celebrating the story of the people who have lived in the area. And it's looking at the aesthetics, keeping it a place that's enjoyable and that is working well. Also with the social well-being of the residents, that's serving Montana first. We looked at this and we said, that crystallizes what we've been talking about in the kind of tourism that Montana wants. So the geotourism concept is one that was developing with the project at the Crown of the Continent, helped us work through, get more of the concept, spread this to other areas of the state while we were working on this project. At about the same time, and this is in the 2006-2007 period, the state of Montana was going through a branding initiative. We'd been challenged by our governor to create a statewide Montana brand, do something that explains this very diverse state. And what we were looking for with this was building off the concepts of geotourism. We were looking to find what is it that Montana has a competitive advantage in that can turn the head of that first-time visitor. We know that if we can get a person to come and visit Montana, we exceed their expectations, and they become a repeat visitor. But what do we need to do? How can we approach that person who hasn't even considered Montana to let them know that we have something special for them? So we went through a branding initiative and used some focus groups in different markets around the country. We talked with Montanans about what they thought our strengths were, what our weaknesses were, what a Montana brand would look like to them. And as a result of this process, we came up with 3 brand pillars that were identifying what is all our messaging going to be based off of. And the very first pillar is the one that we talked about when we're saying how important place is. That Montana has more spectacular, unspoiled nature than anywhere in the lower 48 states. Now, I'd say Alberta does too. We're talking about the states here. Also, you're not just out in wilderness. There are vibrant, charming small towns that are the gateways to that natural wonder. And that's where you can get the local services, the local products, the local foods. That's the mitigator of being scared about all this wide open spaces. There's some great communities and some great main streets for you to enjoy. And then you can have, the third pillar was you can have breathtaking experiences by day and relaxing hospitality at night. Now, how many of you tell that to everyone as well? Well, we wanted to let them know through our brand platform. So this was something that was in the context of the charter, the discussion. These were the foundations that it was based off of. The key kicker for the charter came in our state legislature in 2007. The Montana lawmakers, 150 of them, got together to do all the legislation that was needed for the state of Montana. And we have a tourism advisory council that's appointed by our governor to oversee tourism and recreation policy in the state based on a funding mechanism that we have through a lodging tax. They overview the actions of 6 tourism regions and 12 convention and visitor bureaus. They advise the agency that I work for, the Montana Department of Commerce, and they also advise the governor on tourism policy in the state. They had created, under the geotourism concept of involving culture, aesthetics, heritage, to go with an initiative to provide more funding to our arts organizations and cultural tourism organizations, our tribal or Aboriginal tourism organizations, as well as historic preservation. Those entities particularly had been underfunded in the past. There was a revenue source that exists that could be redirected, not have to create a new tax, but looking to provide these entities more funding, as well as the tourism organizations that then, under the geotourism concept, was going to be promoting all of them and pushing this as this is a revenue generator for the state. We may be taking a tax away from the general fund or some revenue away, but for every dollar that we use for our promotion and going to these more local organizations that are creating local products, we can return $13 to the state of Montana, $250 of which is additional tax money. That was the message taking to the Montana legislature, and they went in and said, we want tourism that's going to do great things for the state, and this is going to bring in more income for Montana. Their experience in going to the legislature was the lawmakers did not view tourism the same way they did. One, we've got such a beautiful place, we don't need to do anything, they're going to come anyway. What do you need more funding for? I've seen tourism. It's that RV that's taken up my parking spot, the one that's in my